Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of A Game and a Chair. This is brought to you by the American Civil War Gaming Club. You can check us out at acwgc.net. If you're someone that enjoys the WDS Civil War games and are looking for a real challenge against a human opponent, come check us out. My name is Blake, I am the host here on this show. And in this episode of A Game and a Chair, we're going to go beyond the pixels. And we will be discussing Colonel George Maney and the Battle of Shiloh. Anyone who has played the Battle of Shiloh will likely be thinking, I don't remember Maney being at that battle. Well, the reason for that is because WDS, for an unknown reason, opted to exclude him from the Confederate Order of Battle and used Colonel William Stevens in his stead. Now, why would they do that? Well, I am now getting ahead of the story. First, let's get to know more about George Maney. Maney was born in August of 1826 in the small Tennessee town of Franklin. The county seat of Williamson County, Franklin is located just south of Nashville. Maney would attend and graduate from the University of Nashville in 1845. Although the University of Nashville stopped operating in 1909, part of its legacy and structure live on at Vanderbilt University and other preparatory schools in the Nashville area. When the Mexican-American War began, Maney volunteered and ended up serving in the 3rd Dragoons under Winfield Scott. He would end the war as a first lieutenant and then return home to Nashville. Once back home, he would take and pass the bar exam to become a lawyer. He also entered state politics and served in the legislature before the outbreak of the Civil War. When the war began, Maney joined the Confederates and enlisted in a Tennessee militia unit. He would then be elected the colonel of the 1st Tennessee in May of 1861. The 1st Tennessee would eventually become one of the most remembered regiments of the Civil War. This is due in large part to 2 privates in the regiment. Sam Watkins would serve the entire war in the 1st Tennessee and would become its most famous member. His memoirs, Company H, would become the best-known memoirs from the soldier's point of view of the war. It remains a must-read for all Civil War historians and even casual history readers. The regiment would end up having another famous member in Sam Davis. Like Maney and Watkins, Davis joined the regiment in 1861 and would fight with it until captured in 1863. Because of his service as a courier and scout, Davis would be tried as a spy and famously hung shortly thereafter. His unique story grew and he eventually became the boy hero of the Confederacy. His legacy continues on today in the state of Tennessee, with his family home becoming a local museum. But all of that would happen in the future. In 1861, the 1st Tennessee would depart Nashville for Virginia. The regiment narrowly missed the First Battle of Bull Run, but would eventually end up serving under Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson in Western Virginia, but would see no major fighting and would spend most of their time marching, camping, and training. With the fall of Forts Henry and Donelson, the 1st Tennessee was ordered to return to Nashville, to join the Confederate forces opposing the Union invasion. While moving through Knoxville, General Kirby Smith would detach half the regiment and send them to Cumberland Gap. The other half would proceed on to Corinth to join the main Confederate army forming there. The regiment would not unite again until after the Battle of Shiloh. Once at Corinth, Maney's regiment would eventually join Colonel William Stevenson's brigade. Maney, as the senior colonel, would become the commander of the brigade and replace Stevens. He would also lead it at the Battle of Shiloh, most of the time. And that brings me back to the original point and conversation about why Maney is not included in the official Confederate Order of Battle in the WDS Shiloh game. Early on April 6th, Johnston would order Maney, with his old 1st Tennessee, Forrest's Cavalry Regiment, and a battery of artillery, to cover the Lick Creek fords along the road to Hamburg on the Army's extreme right flank. Colonel Stevens would take back over the command of the small brigade in Maney's absence, and fight with the rest of Cheatham's division of 1st Corps. Stevens was ill before the battle, and his horse was shot out from under him early in the fighting. This, he later wrote, disabled me from rendering active assistance during the engagement. But Stevens did remain with the brigade as it was ordered to attack the Hornet's Nest around 11 a.m. This would be the first attack on the Union position, destined to become a stronghold for much of April 6. Stevenson's commanding general, Benjamin Cheatham, wrote of the attack against the Hornet's Nest that the enemy opened upon us from his entire front a terrific fire of artillery and musketry. When another part of the enemy's force, concealed and protected by the fence and thicket on our left, opened a murderous crossfire upon our lines. The brigade was repulsed and then sent around to the Army's right flank in an attempt to help turn the Federal position in that area. Maney, along with the 1st Tennessee, rejoined the main army after securing Lick Creek and becoming satisfied that the Army's right flank was secure. Maney was ordered to put together an assault force for a renewed attack against the Hornet's Nest. Maney's own 1st Tennessee would be joined by the 9th Tennessee and the 19th Tennessee from Statham's brigade for the renewed attack on the Federal lines. Maney's attack, like all before it, was met with stiff resistance, and the colonel of the 19th Tennessee was wounded in the fighting. But the attack was part of a larger effort which managed to throw back the Federal left flank as the Confederate Army began encircling the Union forces around the Hornet's Nest. Maney's brigade would continue to fight along these lines until the Federals surrendered the Hornet's Nest that evening. After this point, the actions of Maney's brigade at Shiloh become much harder to follow. The brigade would be split up on April 7th, with parts of it fighting on both flanks of the Confederate Army. On the second day of battle, Maney would fight on the right flank of the Army, along with the 1st and 9th Tennessee. Fighting under various commanders that day, Maney's men alternately attacked or defended along their part of the line. Eventually, Maney wrote, he was ordered to hold at all costs. Maney's force would hold throughout much of April 7th until events on the Army's left flank forced them to retreat from the field and back to Corinth. For his actions at Shiloh, Maney would be promoted to brigadier general and would lead a Tennessee brigade throughout much of the next 2 years of the war. He was wounded at the Battle of Chattanooga, but would return in time for the Atlanta campaign. His wound continued to trouble him, though, and his active service with the Army effectively came to an end in the fall of 1864. After the war, Maney would join the Republican Party and become an active supporter of reconciliation efforts in Tennessee. Maney helped former Confederates to regain control of the state politics after Reconstruction, while also serving as an ambassador to numerous foreign countries under the presidential administrations of Garfield, Arthur, and Harrison. Maney survived until 1901, when he passed away while in Washington, D.C. He would be buried back in Nashville. It seems pretty obvious that the WDS Games Shiloh scenario does Maney wrong by not including him in their order of battle. Stevens commanded the brigade only briefly on April 6th, and he was largely ineffective. Once Maney rejoined the brigade, he resumed command of the whole unit and led it for the remainder of the battle. At the very least, Maney should be included as a leader on the map. While it may seem odd to have two commanders of a single brigade, one only has to look at Hindman's brigade in the 3rd Corps of this same battle to see a similar setup. Hardee divided his small 3rd Corps into two parts and placed Hindman in command of half of the corps, effectively forming two mini-divisions. Hindman's senior colonel, Robert Shaver, commanded Hindman's brigade in the battle. But rather than just leaving Hindman off the map, he remains in the order of battle as the technically correct commander of Hardee's 1st Brigade, while Shaver is just made an extra commander and placed under Hindman in the brigade itself and in the order of battle. In my opinion, the same setup should have been used for Maney and Stevens at Shiloh. Maney should be the rightful commander of the 2nd Brigade of Cheatham's division in the 1st Corps, Stevens should be on the map as his second-in-command only, just like Robert Shaver is. Is it likely that WDS will ever change that? Probably not. But I felt it deserved to be discussed and talked about, as Maney surely gets a raw deal here at the Battle of Shiloh as designed by WDS. I'd love to see them change it though, as Maney played a far greater role in this battle and in the Civil War as a whole than did Stevens. Alright, that sums up another episode of Beyond the Pixels here on A Game in a Chair. I hope you've learned a little bit more about the Battle of Shiloh and George Maney in particular. The next time you see Stevenson's brigade at Shiloh and maybe the 1st Tennessee, I hope you will think about George Maney and wonder, as I always do, why isn't he on the map and in command of his brigade? That's the way it should be. Alright everybody, thank you for watching. I do appreciate it as always. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like this video on here and recommend it to other WDS gamers. You can also subscribe. When you do that, you'll get notified when future videos drop for A Game in a Chair or really anything to do with the American Civil War Gaming Club. Until next time everybody, just remember, keep gaming.